During the holiday season, my mother decided to bring out our family's collection of old photographs to share with my fiancé. As he looked through them, he suddenly became very still, reached for my hand with urgency, and spoke to me in hushed tones. "Can't you perceive it?" he asked me intensely. I responded with confusion. "Perceive? What exactly?" He seemed incredulous at my inability to notice. "How is it possible that you're not seeing this?" he pressed. When he pointed out what he had discovered, I found myself unable to look away from it. 5 hours passed before I found myself dialing the emergency services. I had always imagined that if something truly catastrophic were to occur in my life, something so fundamentally devastating that it would warrant discussion with a mental health professional or perhaps become the subject of a documentary film, there would be some kind of atmospheric accompaniment. You understand what I mean. That subtle, ominous drone that plays quietly in the background of important moments, creating that cinematic feeling of dread and anticipation, perhaps accompanied by the crack of thunder echoing through the scene. However, the reality was far more mundane. Instead of drama, there was a bowl of potato salad sitting on the table. There was lamb that had been cooked for far too long. There was my mother, melodiously humming songs by Mariah Carey while she methodically cleaned the kitchen counter, acting as though she hadn't just deployed nostalgia as a weapon for the 20th year running. There was no dramatic thunder, only that peculiar scent that seems to permeate our home every single holiday season, a combination of lemon-scented cleaning products and something that smells faintly of char. I hadn't arrived with any particular expectations that evening. That's the crucial point to understand. I entered the house in my usual manner, displayed my customary smile, and prepared myself for yet another yearly experience that would serve as a reminder of how I've never quite managed to belong in the family picture. Lucas, my fiancé, maintained his characteristic composure, watchful, reserved, the sort of person who could potentially earn a living simply through the power of observation. I had invited him to accompany me because I believed he could provide me with stability and grounding. Looking back now, the irony is not lost on me. My sister, Nina, had already made her appearance, casually swirling wine in her glass while dressed in something that appeared both beige in color and expensive in quality. Her romantic partner spent most of his time nodding in agreement with various statements. My parents wore smiles that seemed genuine enough on the surface. The dinner itself was exactly what I had come to expect over the years. Recognizable, constrained in conversation, with tension simmering just below the visible surface. The roasted meat was lacking in moisture. The wine we drank had a sharp, acidic quality. My mother directed questions toward Nina regarding her recent career change. My father engaged Lucas in conversation about technology and computers, speaking as though he had never before encountered someone from the millennial generation. Nobody directed any questions toward me, but this was entirely typical of our family gatherings. There was a time when this oversight would have caused me emotional distress. Now, I simply track the duration of time that passes before they begin to act as if I'm not present in the room. This particular year, the countdown reached 9 minutes. Following the dessert course, my mother performed her traditional ritual. She brought her hands together with a clap and announced with apparent spontaneity, "I brought the photograph albums out for us to look through." She delivered this line as if it were an unexpected surprise rather than something she had orchestrated with the precision of a military operation. She always produces these albums without fail. She always performs as though she had just stumbled upon them moments ago in the hallway storage closet, buried beneath a stack of kitchen towels. And we all respond with smiles, pretending we haven't examined these same worn and stained pages 100 times throughout our lives. Nina leaned forward with the enthusiasm of someone watching an award ceremony on television. Her boyfriend arranged his facial expression into what he must have believed was his most convincing display of interest. Lucas positioned himself beside me, maintaining his silence. I found myself observing him more intently than I watched the photographs being displayed. The first album contained the usual collection: birthday celebrations, trips to the beach, uncomfortable school portrait photographs. The second album featured Nina as an infant, with our mother appearing radiant and our father displaying obvious pride. The third album was dedicated to me. That's precisely when I noticed Lucas's demeanor transform. He didn't vocalize anything initially, but I could detect the change. I observed the way tension suddenly filled his shoulders, the way he narrowed his eyes while examining one particular page, then another. I noticed how he angled his head in exactly the same manner he does when he's editing a photograph professionally and identifies a problematic cropping issue. He was actively analyzing, taking measurements with his eyes, calculating something. Then, without shifting his gaze toward me, he reached beneath the table and grasped my hand firmly. "Can't you perceive it?" he whispered urgently into my ear. I responded with a confused blink. "Perceive what exactly?" I asked. He seemed genuinely bewildered by my question. "How is it possible that you're not perceiving this?" Then he released my hand and returned to turning the pages as though nothing unusual had transpired, smiling appropriately and nodding along with my mother's running commentary about an incident from my childhood when I had allegedly attempted to offer a pine cone as food to a homeless cat. I remained seated there, completely frozen in place. My ears had begun to produce a high-pitched, ringing sound. I attempted to synchronize my behavior with his rhythm, to maintain my smile in its proper position, but I felt as though my skin had been turned inside out somehow. When I leaned closer to him and posed the question again, he responded with a subtle shake of his head. "I'll provide an explanation later," he told me quietly. "For now, just continue playing along." Which, if I'm being completely honest, has been the fundamental emotional strategy of my entire childhood experience. We departed from my parents' home 20 minutes after that exchange. Lucas fabricated some excuse about needing to catch an early morning flight. Or perhaps he claimed to have a late-night video conference scheduled. I can't recall the specific details anymore. My mother fussed over our early departure. My father showed no particular interest or concern. Nina failed to even glance up from whatever was occupying her attention on her phone screen. I pressed my lips to everyone's cheeks in farewell, acting as though I wasn't experiencing a complete internal breakdown. Once we were seated in the car, Lucas reached into his coat pocket and extracted several loose photographs. He must have removed them from the stack that had been positioned beside the albums. I hadn't even registered that he had taken them. "Look at these carefully," he instructed me. I made an attempt to comply. Sort of. The first image showed me wearing a pink-colored coat, standing positioned in front of a stone wall structure. I had encountered this photograph before in my life. It existed in my memory with the same permanence as unattractive wallpaper. "What about it?" I asked him. "It's merely a photograph, nothing more." He passed 2 additional photographs into my hands. "Identical facial expression," he stated plainly. "Identical angle of photography, identical smile formation, identical shadow patterns. Examine them more carefully." I looked with greater attention, and that's when I finally perceived what he had been seeing. It was me, certainly, but it was the exact same version of me, as though someone had copied and pasted my image into various different backgrounds and settings. One photograph showed me in front of a fence structure. Another placed me beside a swing set. Yet another positioned me at a fountain. However, my facial expression remained completely unchanged across all of them. Not a single muscle appeared to have moved differently. "They utilized the same image of my face, repeatedly," I said aloud. My voice sounded peculiar to my own ears, as though the words were originating from deep within the back of my throat. He acknowledged this with a nod of his head. Then he handed me yet another photograph. This one depicted a baby, pale in complexion, with hair of a lighter shade, with a completely different bone structure visible. "That isn't you," he said with certainty. "I don't believe they ever possessed actual baby photographs of you." He gave me one final photograph to examine. This image showed me positioned between my mother and father, standing in front of some old building structure. My outline appeared fuzzy and indistinct. The shadows didn't correspond with the lighting that should have been present. I appeared like a sticker that someone had begun to peel away from a surface but had forgotten to complete the removal process. I stared at the photograph for an extended period of time. Then I released a laugh. It wasn't an authentic laugh. It was the sort of sound that emerges from a person when something fractures inside their mind. So, essentially, I'm a collage, I said. That's quite amusing, isn't it? Lucas didn't join me in laughter. His expression remained serious. Why would they create falsified versions of this? I asked him directly. He didn't provide an answer. Neither did I, for that matter. I didn't possess the knowledge yet, but 5 hours into the future, I would find myself placing a call to the police department. The truth about denial is that it doesn't shatter all at once in a single moment. The slow revelation. The realization seeps into your consciousness, much like an aging pipe beneath a kitchen sink that the entire household has made a collective, unspoken agreement to ignore completely. You're aware that it's releasing droplets of water. You can detect the sound of it, perceive the odor of dampness, but you continue to rinse your hands in the basin above and retreat from the area. Throughout the entire night, I found myself fixated on those photographs. Lucas ultimately surrendered to sleep beside me in the bed, but I remained completely motionless. I simply maintained my seated position in the bed, like some child anticipating the arrival of creatures from nightmares. The difference being that the creatures had already been given identities: mother and father. The photographs had been arranged in a line on the surface of my bedside table. I found myself repeatedly examining them as though they might somehow repair themselves during the brief moments when I wasn't actively observing them. They never did repair themselves. My facial features were still present in the images, artificially inserted, reproduced in triplicate, captured in some predetermined expression that I had absolutely no recollection of ever producing. That infant in the photograph was still definitively not me. The illumination in the images was still completely incorrect and inconsistent. And then the understanding struck me with force, not as a vocalized scream or some dramatic crack of realization like thunder, but rather like a murmured statement I found myself unable to stop hearing once it had been spoken. I possessed absolutely no knowledge of my origins. I intend this statement in the most literal sense possible. I have zero memories of my existence before I reached the age of 5 years old. Absolutely none whatsoever. During my younger years, I had convinced myself that this absence of early memories was within the bounds of normalcy, or perhaps not precisely normal in the strictest sense, but at minimum something that could be reasonably explained. My parents provided me with an explanation that it was a consequence of the war that had occurred. They told me I was very young at the time. They informed me that I had experienced severe trauma. They explained to me that the human brain has protective mechanisms. They made numerous statements, and I accepted their explanations as truth because what alternative interpretation existed? Should I have informed my second-grade teacher that I suspected I had somehow bypassed the toddler phase of development entirely? That my earliest memory that I could access was of standing in a corridor illuminated by fluorescent lighting in a foreign country, with my mother instructing me to display a smile to someone who was holding a clipboard in their hands. Yes, that specific moment was my first genuine memory that I could recall. The immigration office building. The persistent buzzing sound produced by the overhead lights. The sensation that every element of my surroundings was excessively loud and uncomfortably cold and fundamentally wrong in some way I couldn't articulate. I had not yet acquired comprehension of the English language, but I possessed complete understanding of the expression visible in my mother's eyes. The unspoken command, perform your role. From that point forward, everything progressed in what appeared to be a normal fashion, or at least as normal as circumstances could permit. We resided in a modest apartment unit. I began attending educational institutions. My mother prepared packed lunches for me in the same manner that the other mothers performed this task for their children, with the exception that she never included written notes of encouragement or affection. She sent me off to school with napkins that had been folded with perfect precision instead. My father consumed the newspaper with the intensity of someone who believed it was indebted to him financially. They both labored with great effort and dedication. They provided me with the essential items I required for survival. However, love, that was an entirely different matter, an entirely separate category of provision. When my sister, Nina, entered the world 2 years after our arrival, the emotional temperature within the household underwent a transformation that occurred literally overnight. In an instant, there were suddenly guidebooks about infant care and video camera recordings and scrapbooks decorated with adhesive letters covered in glitter. There were birthday celebrations with carefully coordinated decorative themes. There were excursions to spa facilities for relaxation and pampering. There were physical embraces. There was genuine warmth in the atmosphere. Absolutely none of these demonstrations of affection had ever been present for me, not at any point in my existence. In my case, the recurring phrases were always variations of, "You possess strength of character. You demonstrate independence. You've never required much in terms of attention or care," which functions as merely an alternative method of communicating. We failed to provide you with much of anything. I used to construct narratives to console myself, telling myself it was simply because I was the older child, because I arrived first, because they were still learning the processes of parenthood and attempting to determine the correct approach. But now, in this moment, I was no longer confident in those explanations. There were no maternal aunts in our lives, no paternal uncles, no cousins of any kind. No individual ever traveled from the country of origin to visit us. We never made the journey back to visit. My parents maintained the position that they had no remaining family connections. It was a consequence of the war, they would state. Everyone has been dispersed to different locations. I posed questions about extended family on one occasion. My father responded by saying the situation was complicated and difficult to explain. My mother redirected the topic of conversation to something else entirely. And then there was the incident involving the message on Facebook. I was 15 years of age at the time. I entered the kitchen area and observed her seated at the laptop computer. She was staring with intensity at a message composed in a language that I could not comprehend at that particular time, the Serbian language. There was a name present that I didn't recognize as familiar, belonging to a woman. The message contained heart symbols within it. My mother's facial expression was completely devoid of emotion or reaction. Then she proceeded to delete the message, blocked the individual who had sent it, and closed the laptop computer shut. When I inquired about the identity of the message sender, she responded simply, "Spam." Unsolicited spam messages don't typically send you communications that cause your hands to tremble with emotion. But I allowed the incident to pass without further investigation because I consistently allowed such incidents to pass without investigation. I received a formal diagnosis of post-traumatic stress disorder at the age of 17. I experienced nightmares during sleep, sudden panic attacks, and this persistent, continuously present sensation of fear, as though something catastrophic was perpetually on the verge of occurring. As though I was in a constant state of anticipation for a door to slam, shut violently that never actually did slam. My therapist posed questions to me about the war and my experiences. I informed her that I possessed no memories of it whatsoever. She suggested that this absence of memory was likely the source of my psychological distress. However, now I possess the knowledge that I wasn't experiencing fear related to the war itself. I was experiencing fear specifically related to her, to my mother. I didn't recover this understanding immediately or all at once. The realization didn't arrive like a bolt of lightning striking. It materialized in fragments, in disconnected pieces. During that particular night, as I maintained my seated position at the kitchen table, directing my gaze at the photographs that Lucas had removed and brought home, one memory suddenly illuminated itself like a flashlight being activated in a room filled with darkness. A woman appeared in my mind. Not my mother. Not the woman who performed the role of raising me, throughout my childhood. Someone completely different. A face with softer features, eyes that were dark in color. Her scent was reminiscent of citrus fruits. I was grasping her hand in mine, and then there existed another woman in my fragmented memory. Not the one who raised me and called herself my mother. Someone else entirely. A voice with gentler tones, hands that moved with tenderness. I was holding her hand tightly. Then the woman whom I grew up addressing as Mom walked into the space. She appeared younger in this memory, smiling in a manner that suggested she had just recently arrived at this location. The first woman with the gentle features bent down to my level and spoke in the Serbian language. "This is the person who will be your babysitter." That was the very first time I encountered her, the woman who would become my mother. Then another fragment of memory flashed before my consciousness. I could see myself pulling on a coat, tears streaming down my face, vocalizing the words, "I want Mama." And I could feel a hand positioned on my shoulder, gripping with uncomfortable tightness. Another voice instructing me firmly, "Don't vocalize that statement again. If you speak about her, about your real mother, you will disappear. You will cease to exist." I possess the memory of those exact words now, in this present moment. I didn't possess them before. They had been absent from my conscious mind, but they had been residing there all along, buried beneath years upon years of being instructed to display a smile for the camera lens. And then I remembered the screaming. I was positioned in a bed. This bed was new and unfamiliar and strange to me. My legs were kicking out violently. My chest was burning with the pain of sobbing. I was calling out desperately for her. The first woman, the one whose scent reminded me of citrus fruits, the one who I now understood was my actual mother. And there was another voice present. This voice was cold, devoid of warmth or compassion. Enough of this behavior. I possess no knowledge of the duration for which the panic attack persisted. Perhaps it lasted only a handful of minutes. Perhaps it extended for what felt like centuries of time. The emergency call. Lucas discovered me collapsed on the kitchen floor, struggling to draw breath, my hands pressed flat against the cold tile surface, as though I was attempting to grasp onto something solid and real. He made an attempt to make physical contact with me. I recoiled instinctively from his touch. So instead, he positioned himself beside me on the floor, refraining from vocalizing anything. And at some point during the middle of that experience, while still remaining on the floor, with my breath trapped and caught in my throat, with my vision becoming blurred and swimming, I extended my reach toward my mobile phone and entered the emergency number, 911. The emergency operator answered the call on the third attempt at ringing. 911. What is the nature of your emergency? My chest felt as though it was collapsing inward on itself. My mouth opened wide, but initially no audible sound emerged from it. Lucas remained in his kneeling position beside me, with one hand resting on my back, working to stabilize my breathing pattern as though he possessed the ability to anchor it in place. I ultimately managed to force the words out of my mouth with great effort. I've been abducted. I've been kidnapped. A pause occurred on the other end of the line, the silence feeling sharper now, more focused. Ma'am, are you currently in a safe location right now? I believe so. I'm at home in my residence. Is the individual who abducted you currently with you at this moment? No, it occurred a long time ago in the past. I believe I just recovered the memory of it now. Another pause followed, and then there was a shift in the operator's tone of voice. Still gentle in quality, still maintaining control. Okay, I need you to take a deep breath for me. You're not currently in any immediate danger right now, correct? No, but what I'm telling you is genuine. I remember it now. They weren't actually my biological parents. Lucas reached across the space and removed the phone from my grasp. Hello, this is her fiancé speaking. She's currently experiencing a severe panic attack. It just began approximately 15 minutes ago. She's been in the process of discovering some things, uncovering information. Childhood photographs that appear clearly manipulated and edited. No official birth records that we can locate. Strange and weird inconsistencies in her history. And she just experienced a very vivid and intense memory. She has come to believe that she was abducted when she was approximately 5 years old. This abduction would have occurred 25 years ago, outside the borders of the United States. The emergency operator maintained her calm demeanor throughout. I understand the situation. What is your current location and address? Lucas provided our residential address to her. I'm going to document this as a welfare check and forward the information to the department's investigative unit, she explained. You'll receive a phone call from someone to follow up on this matter. If either of you experiences feelings of being unsafe in the meantime, don't hesitate or wait. Call us back immediately without delay. Lucas expressed his gratitude to her and disconnected the call. I was still experiencing tremors throughout my body, but the words had been vocalized out loud to someone who was real, someone official, and there was no reversing that action now. I didn't manage to sleep at all. I entered the shower, changed into different clothes, folded laundry that I had no recollection of placing in the machine. I believe at one point I emptied the dishwasher of its clean contents. Lucas remained nearby, hovering in my vicinity, prepared tea, observed me as though I was fragile glassware during an earthquake. You should get some rest, he suggested at one point during the night. I nodded my head in response, but didn't actually move from my position. I kept anticipating that someone would knock on the door or violently burst through it, or that the floor would simply fall out from beneath my feet. Instead, the apartment remained quiet, producing a soft humming sound as though it was completely indifferent to what was happening to me. The following morning arrived, and I received an electronic mail message. The subject line read, "Case file opened, pending contact from an assigned investigating officer. Someone would be making contact soon." That was the entirety of the information provided. I showed the message to Lucas. He read through it twice, studying the words, then simply nodded his head. "It's real now," he stated. "Real?" As though it hadn't been real when I was curled up on the kitchen floor, attempting to remember whether I'd ever actually possessed a real mother. The knock on our door came 2 days following that initial contact. 3 distinct taps, measured in their rhythm, calm in their delivery, like someone performing a favor. I opened the door and observed my mom standing there holding a brown paper bag as though she was delivering homemade cookies to us. My dad stood positioned slightly behind her, his hands inserted in his coat pockets, his facial expression neutral and unreadable. "Can we come inside?" she asked, already stepping forward into the doorway before receiving a response. Lucas appeared beside me in the entryway. I nodded slowly and permitted them to enter. They positioned themselves on the couch as though they were visitors, guests in an unfamiliar home. My mom placed the brown paper bag on the coffee table surface. "I brought some of that soup that you enjoy, the carrot-based one from when you were ill that one time. That one time when I was 8 years old and she instructed me to stop crying because I wasn't actually dying. That particular soup?" "Thanks," I said in a flat tone devoid of emotion. She smoothed down her coat with her hands and looked around the apartment as though the surroundings might help her determine what to say. My dad remained in a standing position. "We spoke to the police," she said, finally breaking the silence. "They informed us that you filed an official report." "I did file a report." She appeared as though she wanted to be offended by this action, but didn't possess the energy to maintain that emotion. "You should have just come to us first, before involving the authorities. Would you have told me the truth if I had?" She paused, blinking her eyes. "We didn't want to cause you pain or hurt you." Lucas spoke up. "So, what she's saying is true, then?" My dad finally stepped forward from his position. "Yes," he said directly. "You're not biologically ours. You're not our biological child." I exhaled forcefully through my nose. Not a sound of relief, just a confirmation of something I already knew internally, but needed someone to vocalize out loud. My mom nodded her head in acknowledgement. Your mother was young, very young in age. She couldn't take care of you properly. She begged us, pleaded with us to take you with us when we left. Beg. I repeated the word. She wanted you to have a better life, better opportunities. We were leaving the country, and she was staying behind in that place. It was wartime. She knew what that meant, what that would mean for your future. So where is she now? Where is my real mother? My mom folded her hands together in her lap. We don't know her current location. You never checked? You never tried to find out? It was complicated. The situation was complicated. Lucas crossed his arms over his chest. Why did you falsify the photographs? My dad didn't flinch at the question. We didn't want her to feel like she didn't belong with us, like she was different. So you erased her real life, her actual history, and invented a false one to replace it? Lucas asked with an edge to his voice. My mom's voice cracked with emotion. You were 5 years old. You cried for her for weeks on end. It was awful to witness, but you adjusted eventually. You forgot about her. We thought it was better that way, healthier for everyone. You could have told me the truth eventually, I said. And said what? She snapped back with sudden intensity. That we took you from your biological mother? That you had a life you'd never be able to remember? You would have hated us for it. You think I don't hate you now? Silence filled the room, thick and oppressive. The photograph and the name. Then she extracted something from her bag. A photograph. An image of me, perhaps 6 years old, grasping my dad's hand. This one's genuine, she said, as though that single authentic photograph was supposed to repair everything that had been broken. I didn't reach out to touch it. They rose to their feet. My dad looked directly at Lucas, then shifted his gaze to me. We didn't steal you from anyone. We rescued you from a terrible situation. I didn't provide an answer. Neither did Lucas offer any response. And the worst part of this entire exchange was that, for approximately 10 seconds, I almost believed their version of events. I didn't pose the question gently or politely. I stated firmly, tell me her name. Tell me my real mother's name. My mom blinked her eyes as though she didn't comprehend the question I was asking. My dad performed his usual behavior pattern where he rubbed his face with his hand as though he was exhausted by the weight of having to deal with me and my demands. You were 5 years old, she said defensively. Your memories from that time, they aren't reliable or trustworthy. Try me anyway. Tell me her name. She shook her head in refusal. We didn't want to cause you pain or hurt you with this information. You already did hurt me. That damage is done. They looked at each other, exchanging a glance. Then my dad vocalized the name as though it was a confession being extracted from him. Mara Petrovich. No address provided, no contact information, just the name itself. When I pressed for more details, my mom said simply, we lost touch with her. It was wartime. Right. And apparently armed conflict also erases your ability to type a name into a search engine like Google. We began our search that same night. Lucas was positioned at his laptop computer. I was stationed at mine. My comprehension of the Serbian language is passable when I'm engaged in conversation with elderly relatives about food and cooking. But online research presents another story entirely. Mara Petrovich, apparently not an uncommon name in that region. There were few dead ends that led nowhere. A florist who ran a shop in Novi Sad. A retired physical education teacher residing in Belgrade. Then I clicked on a grainy, low-resolution Facebook profile. No smile visible, no filters applied. Just a woman with dark hair pulled back away from her face, appearing to be in her early 50s, faint lines visible around her eyes, and a face that made my stomach drop with immediate recognition. I stared at the image. Lucas leaned over my shoulder. She looks like you, he said with quiet observation. I shook my head, slowly in disagreement. No, that's not quite right. I look like her. It wasn't just a resemblance or similarity. It was the kind of uncanny similarity that makes you profoundly uncomfortable. The kind you don't perceive in the mirror until someone else points it out to you directly. The same jawline structure, the same eyes, the same expression when she wasn't attempting to produce one artificially. She hadn't posted any content in months, but her About section listed a town in southern Serbia, the same one I'd heard mentioned once in passing when I was 10 years old, and my mom had made a verbal slip-up. We sent a message to her. We used Google Translate to compose it. It probably sounded robotic and mechanical, but Lucas checked it 3 times to ensure accuracy. I stared at the screen the entire time as though it might answer me back immediately. Hello. I was given your name. I think I might be your daughter. Then we waited for a response. She replied the next morning. 1 line only. Can we talk? We set up a video call connection. I don't remember agreeing to it or making the decision. Lucas did all the clicking and technical setup. I just sat there wrapped in a blanket, feeling like I was about to meet someone from a dream I didn't know I'd had, someone from a life I couldn't remember. And then her face appeared on the screen. She looked older than her profile photograph suggested, tired and worn, but still her, still fundamentally me. She didn't speak at first, just stared at the screen. Her hand went to her mouth as though she needed to hold something inside, to contain an emotion. I wasn't sure it was really you, she said finally, breaking the silence. But now that I see you, now that I can look at your face. I wanted to vocalize something, anything at all, but the words got stuck somewhere behind the lump that had formed in my throat. I've been looking for you for 25 years, she said. Then she said my name. It wasn't Isabel back then. It was Melina at that time. I froze completely. Melina. It didn't sound familiar to my ears, but it felt right in some deeper way, like a shoe I hadn't worn in decades, but still fit perfectly when I tried it on. I blinked, trying to maintain my composure and stay steady. Did you give me up? Did you surrender me willingly? Her face broke apart, not dramatically, not like in the movies you watch, just this quiet collapse in her expression, a crumbling from within. Her mouth opened, then closed again without producing sound. No, she said with force. God, no, I would never. She looked off-screen for a second as though she needed to ground herself, to find stability. Then she turned back to face the camera. You were 5 years old. I had to leave you with someone I trusted, a neighbor who was also a friend, just for a couple of hours while I traveled to the municipal office to finalize some papers, some documents. When I came back to retrieve you, you were gone. She paused, taking a breath. They said she, your babysitter, had left earlier than expected. Said you went with her willingly, but you never came home to me. Her voice cracked with emotion. We searched everywhere. I went to every police station in the area, every refugee camp. I posted flyers with your photograph. I called shelters repeatedly. Everyone said the same thing. Children get lost during wartime. But I knew deep down you didn't get lost accidentally. You were taken. She paused again. I just didn't know where to look for you, which direction to search. I sat very still, barely breathing. Lucas was the one who asked the next question. Did you ever apply to leave the country? She nodded her head. I was approved for a resettlement program to the United States. Families with children got priority placement. I had everything ready and prepared. She looked directly at me then, her eyes meeting mine through the screen. But after you disappeared, they removed me from the list. Not that I would have left without you anyway. And then it hit me with more force than any recovered memory ever had. That's why they did it. That's why they took me from her. Why they needed me specifically. Why they edited me into those photographs like I was some final puzzle piece that completed their picture. They didn't take me because they loved me or cared about me. They took me because I got them out of the country. I was their ticket to a new life. We sat in silence for a while after that revelation. Her eyes were red and swollen. Mine probably were too. Lucas didn't say anything. He just sat next to me like he was trying to hold the edges of the room together, to keep everything from falling apart. "I never knew where you went," she said softly, her voice barely above a whisper. "I thought maybe someone took you over the border to another country. I thought maybe you died in the chaos. I didn't know what to hope for, what outcome to pray for. I didn't know what to say to that confession, how to respond to years of her pain and searching, the beginning of healing. What do you vocalize to a woman who lost you, who had you taken from her life?" "They changed my name," I said instead of answering her unspoken question directly. "Isabel," she nodded as though the sound of it caused her physical pain. Melina was your grandmother's name, wasn't it?" I don't know what I had expected to feel in this moment. Fury? A sense of relief? Instead, I felt hollow and empty, as though someone had reached inside my chest cavity and scooped everything out completely, but had politely left the shell intact so I could continue functioning in public settings and carrying on with daily life. 2 weeks later in time, we stood positioned side by side at the police precinct building. She wore a navy-colored coat. I brought the photographs with me as evidence. The investigating officer took our statements, posed questions to us that I barely remember providing answers to. My mom, my real biological mom, unfolded a creased flyer from her purse, the original missing persons notice from decades ago. My name, the first one, the real one, was printed beneath a grainy photograph. Melina Petrovich, age 5 years old, last seen wearing a red scarf around her neck. "This is her," she told the officer with certainty, pointing at me. "This is my daughter standing right here." And for the first time in my entire life, someone else nodded in acknowledgement and belief. We pressed criminal charges against them, and I stopped pretending that the past was something I owed to anyone except myself. It didn't proceed to trial. They were found guilty during the investigation phase. Immigration fraud, falsifying federal documents, concealing a child abduction across international borders. It turns out they never gave up their Serbian passports at any point. They just tucked them away safely in a drawer right next to where they'd apparently stored their moral compass. Their American citizenship was revoked and stripped away. They were deported from the country within 6 months' time. No appeals were granted, no second chances were offered, and they can never return to this country again. Nina stayed in the United States. Of course she did. She was born here on American soil. At first, she didn't vocalize much of anything, just stared at the floor a lot during our few interactions. Then one day, she came over to my apartment and said simply, "That was really messed up, what they did to you." It wasn't an apology exactly, not in the traditional sense, but it was something, some acknowledgement. We communicate more now than we ever did during our childhood years growing up in the same household. She's not my sister by blood relation, by biological connection, but she still knows how I take my coffee in the morning, and that counts for something meaningful. As for Mara, my real mother, my biological mother, she moved to the United States 6 months after everything had settled down and been resolved. She came through the family reunification program. Lucas and I provided assistance with the paperwork and documentation. She obtained employment at a bakery near our apartment building. She says it reminds her of the one she worked at when she was 21 years old, before everything happened, before the war, before I was taken from her. We're currently planning our wedding ceremony. She's on the guest list. She cried tears of joy when she received the invitation in the mail. The people who raised me, who took me and claimed me as their own, lost everything they had built. And honestly, looking at it objectively, they built their entire life on a foundation of lies and deception. So when it collapsed around them, when everything fell apart, I didn't feel guilty about my role in their downfall. I felt free. I felt liberated for the first time. Did I go too far in my actions, or did I not go far enough? Tell me your thoughts in the comments section below. Reflection. What does it mean to discover that your entire childhood was constructed, fabricated, built on stolen moments and manipulated memories. How do you reconcile the years spent believing one narrative when the truth was so radically different? These are questions I continue to grapple with daily. The woman I called Mom for over 2 decades wasn't the villain from a movie. She was someone who made a choice, a terrible choice, but one she convinced herself was justified. She told herself she was saving me, rescuing me from a war-torn country. But saving someone doesn't require erasing their identity. It doesn't require photoshopping them into a false history. It doesn't require threatening a child into silence. Every time I look in the mirror now, I see Mara looking back at me. The resemblance is undeniable, unmistakable. It's in the curve of my jaw, the set of my eyes, the way my mouth turns down slightly when I'm thinking. These are things I couldn't see before, things I'd been trained not to see. But now they're all I can see. Lucas has been my anchor through all of this. When I wake up in the middle of the night, disoriented and unsure of which name is really mine, he's there. When I receive calls from journalists wanting to tell my story, he screens them. When I break down crying in the grocery store because I saw carrot soup on the shelf, he just holds me and doesn't ask questions. The therapy has helped. My therapist specializes in trauma, specifically in cases involving childhood abduction and identity manipulation. She's helped me understand that my PTSD wasn't about a war I couldn't remember. It was about a theft I had been forced to forget. My body remembered what my mind had been trained to suppress. The nightmares, the panic attacks, the persistent feeling that something terrible was about to happen. These were all warning signs that my subconscious had been screaming for years. Mara and I are building a relationship, slowly and carefully. We can't recover the 25 years that were stolen from us. I can't remember her tucking me into bed or teaching me my first words or celebrating my birthdays. Those memories are gone forever, erased by people who thought they had the right to rewrite my history. But we can create new memories. We can build something authentic and real. She teaches me Serbian phrases, the words I would have grown up speaking naturally. She cooks traditional meals and tells me stories about my grandmother, the woman whose name I carried without knowing it. She shows me photographs of relatives I never met, people who would have been part of my life if circumstances had been different. Each conversation is a small piece of restoration, a tiny fragment of identity being returned to its rightful owner. Nina's role in all of this remains complicated. She was innocent, born into a family dynamic she didn't create. But she also benefited from my erasure. She received the love, attention, and authentic childhood that I was denied. We're working through that complexity together. Some days are better than others. The legal proceedings brought a sense of closure, but also raised new questions. How many other children were taken under similar circumstances? How many families are still searching? How many people are living with false identities, unaware of their true origins? The immigration authorities have indicated that my case may have opened a larger investigation, but they can't share details. I've been contacted by others with similar stories, people who always felt out of place in their families, people whose childhood photographs don't quite look right, people with gaps in their early memories that were explained away with convenient narratives. I'm not sure I'm ready to become a spokesperson for this cause, but I've realized that sharing my story might help others recognize their own. The question of whether I went too far continues to haunt me in quiet moments. I destroyed a family. I caused 2 people to lose their citizenship, their home, their life in this country. Nina lost her parents in a practical sense, even though she can still communicate with them from a distance. But then I remember the little girl holding hands with someone who smelled like citrus. I remember the terror of being told I would disappear if I spoke about my real mother. I remember years of feeling like I didn't quite fit, like something fundamental was wrong, but I couldn't articulate what. And I realized that I didn't destroy a family. I escaped from a carefully constructed prison. Justice is complicated. It's not always satisfying. It doesn't erase the damage that was done, but it does provide acknowledgement that the damage was real, that the pain was justified, that the theft was criminal. And sometimes acknowledgement is enough to begin healing. As I prepare for my wedding, I think about the future rather than dwelling exclusively on the past. I think about the children Lucas and I might have someday. I think about the stories I'll tell them about their grandmother Mara, about her strength and perseverance and unending love. I think about how I'll teach them their real heritage, their authentic history, without the manipulations and fabrications. And I think about how identity is both fragile and resilient, how it can be stolen but also eventually reclaimed. The comment section will undoubtedly be filled with opinions. Some will say I was too harsh. Others will say I should have pursued even harsher penalties. But ultimately, this isn't about public opinion or popular judgment. This is about a little girl named Melina who deserved to grow up with her real mother. This is about justice delayed but not denied. This is about truth, however painful, being better than the most comfortable lie. So yes, I called the police. Yes, I pressed charges. Yes, I watched as the people who raised me lost everything. And yes, I would do it again. Because the alternative would be continuing to live in a photograph that was never real, with a smile that was never genuine, in a life that was never truly mine.